Hello, welcome to Girls Right Now Live Unmuted. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's pre-show. I'm Courtney, I'm a Girls Right Now mentor.
And I'm Dominique, a Girls Right Now mentee. We will be your MCs for tonight, and we are so thrilled to have you here with tonight's Agent of Change Honoree Georgina Lawton, author of Raceless, In Search of Family, Identity, and the Truth About Where I Belong, and host of Audible's The Secrets in Us program. This book is an enthralling autobiographical retelling of Georgina's life as a Black woman finding her identity in the midst of unraveling a well-kept family secret.
I'm reading this book right now, and I'm absolutely loving it. The writing is just so gorgeous. Thank you, Georgina. And let's get going. Welcome, Georgina, and thank you so much for joining us live tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dominique, you want to start off?
Yeah. So I guess our first question would be, what kind of mentors, especially writing mentors, have you had over the years? Is there a specific mentor who changed your life?
I'm probably not the best person to ask because I haven't really had many mentors. I guess there's a friend of mine who works for a magazine in the UK called Galdem, which is all about uplifting the voices of non-binary women and women of colour. And yeah, she is probably the closest thing I've had to a mentor. When I first started writing about race and identity online, I contacted her and we formed a really close friendship, and she's helped me with contacts over the years. She's helped me with feedback. She's helped me with ideas, but she's not older than me. She's actually a year and a half younger than me. So she's been the closest thing I would have to a mentor, but not in the traditional sense, like somebody older that you really, really look up to with years of experience. She was just full of ideas and full of enthusiasm, and she's got a great career. So I think a mentor doesn't have to be necessarily somebody who's been in the industry for so much longer than you. It can just be someone who's your peer, who you also want to work alongside. And we have ended up working together. I've worked at Galdem for a little bit. So I guess, yeah, Charlie is her name, Charlie Brinkhurst-Cuff. She's the closest thing I've had to a mentor.
Love that. What got you from the idea of that this is a story that needs to be told to, or this is a good story idea, to sitting down and actually putting it down on paper?
Yeah, so I guess I started writing about race and identity in 2017, and my stories were for The Guardian and they were for Mary Claire, and they started to go viral. So luckily I was approached by The Guardian to do a column every week for the family section in the weekend paper. And when I could see that my writing was having an impact, that it was reaching lots of people, and editors could see that it was having an impact, I guess that gave me more confidence to carry on writing. And it also put me in touch with agents and publishers who said, hey, you should write a book. And I was like, me? Because I was, only 24 at the time. So it was a lot of attention suddenly on me, but I'd wanted to, put my writing out there for a while, and luckily it was received well. And I also got lots of emails and messages from people around the world who had had DNA test surprises, or whose identities had been hidden or obscured by their family. So there were lots of similarities I was realizing in my stories and the stories of other people around the world in other communities. And all of that just gave me the confidence to keep pushing until I chose an agent. And then me and my agent worked on a manuscript together, or a proposal rather. And then, yeah, once I had all that kind of positive feedback behind me, I could really see the book Raceless starting to take shape. So it wasn't a traditional path to a book deal, but it was something I'm really lucky to have had, because I was, approached by other people, and that definitely imbued me with a lot of self-confidence as I was developing as a writer.
Why do you feel it's important to support or align with Girls Right Now's work? What aspect of the work done by Girls Right Now has resonated with you?
I think the idea of, mentors and mentees, as I was saying, it's not something that I've really had in the traditional sense, but as my career's taken off, it's something that I'd like to get into. I'd like to mentor young women. I'd like to align myself with literacy charities as I reflect on my own childhood and, really think about the support that I've had from my parents and the support that I've had from other people over the years who encouraged me to write. I wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for all that support. So yeah, definitely as I've become more successful, I've really started to think about how to give back, and mentees and mentorship is something that I'm really interested in, something that I'm passionate about. and yeah, literacy charities, which I've seen some of my peers get involved with here in the UK. That is something that I'd like to support moving forward as well. So yeah, there's a lot going on that, you know, Girls Right Now represent that I can definitely see myself getting involved with in the future as well.
We kind of, you touched a little bit on the subject of your book. Sorry, we're jumping a little bit all over the place, but we'd love to hear more about your book, and like if you could just tell us about what inspired you to write it and your story a little bit.
Yeah, so where should I begin? I talked to you about how I got the book deal, didn't I? But basically what I started writing about was my experiences growing up in a white family and not knowing anything about my Blackness, not knowing why I was Black, not having answers around my identity. And, you know, that had just been my normal for 20 something years. And I'd always had questions, and I'd always asked my mum and my parents, you know, if they could fill me in on my heritage. My dad was British and white, my mum is Irish. And we would spend every summer in Ireland, and I'd be the only Black person that looked like me in this, you know, really small Irish village. And I had great memories of going to Ireland, and I had great memories of, you know, hanging out with my dad's family near Wales, which is, you know, a rural part of the UK. But these were very homogenous areas, and where I grew up just outside of London was very white. You know, I was the only Black kid in my elementary school in my year. But I didn't see myself as Black because we weren't having these conversations. And I realized that I was different, but I didn't know how to really, I guess, accept who I was and really feel that sense of pride around my identity. And I had a lot of love and support from my parents. I had a younger brother and we were close, but, you know, everyone had blue eyes and freckles, and that's not me. So there was a lot of confusion around that, and there was a lot of silence. And even though me and my dad were really close, we never spoke about what that meant for both of us. And when he got really sick in 2015, I had this kind of feeling of dread because he was cancer and he wasn't going to be around for much longer. But I was also, you know, really consumed with thoughts about why we hadn't spoken about this and what was going to happen after he wasn't around. And, you know, we brought it up, but we didn't really go into it. And a year after he passed away, I finally got his DNA test results processed that he'd given me his data for. And then I found out a year later that, you know, he wasn't my biological dad. And I was like, okay, so I've lost him, but now I've lost half of my identity, and the relationship that I thought I had with my dad isn't biological. And then I had to go to my mum, and my mum couldn't speak about the results, even though I had them in my hand. And that was really difficult. It was really, really difficult. And I left the UK for a while to go traveling and to really put space between me and my mum, but to also play catch up with lots of things that I hadn't done, like things that I'd been afraid to do, like getting my hair braided and, you know, living in amongst Black communities. I've been really reluctant to distance myself from, you know, my white family because that was all I knew. So I wanted to go and really reclaim parts of my identity that I'd suppressed. So I did that, and I lived in Brooklyn for a while, which I loved. And I lived in the Dominican Republic, in Cuba, Nicaragua, just sort of wherever I fancied. And it was a real privilege. It was amazing. I did lots of travel writing. Then I came back and started therapy with my mum, started therapy for me, started writing about everything and writing about, I guess, what you would call transracial families, which doesn't mean changing race. It literally just means, you know, being raised by a family or a caregiver that's of a different cultural or ethnic background to you. And that had been my experience, although I didn't use that word. I don't think many people used it until it suddenly became misused by someone who we won't talk about. But yeah, I started writing about those experiences, and people who were adopted said, oh, some, you know, similar things have happened to me. And people who had DNA test results were saying to me, oh, similar things have happened to me. So I was getting all these responses from people around the world, and that's how the book came about. And that's what the book is about. It's about my journey, and it's about other people's stories, and it's about some research and, I guess, studies into what it means to be raised by those of a different background to you, and what it means to pass, you know, even though I can't pass racially, but I was passing as my dad's daughter, and I was passing culturally for white because my parents insisted that was the case when I was a kid. So I look at the American concept of passing a little bit and just tell my story and talk about how I've managed to reclaim my identity, talk about DNA tests, talk about my travels as a Black woman, because there's not a lot of people who look like me doing, you know, travel writing these days. We've got a lot of people on Instagram, but it's still underrepresented. So that's what Raceless is about in a nutshell. I feel like I've gone around the houses there, but that's that's the book.
A lot to put your arms around or write about.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
We've had a few questions submitted
Okay.
through Zoom and also from before the show started. So this one's from Iram Woolley. I hope I said your name correctly. What's the worst setback you've had and how did you overcome it?
I wonder if they mean writing setback or personal setbacks, because there's been a few. I guess personal setbacks, kind of, everything I just spoke about, like, having a half of my identity dismantled and trying to disrupt the big silence in my life that didn't want to be disrupted. It was really hard to get people to talk about privilege and discrimination and race when I was the only person who looked like me. That was really, really tough. So lots of personal setbacks that I hope I've turned into something positive in the book. But professional setbacks, I guess, I get professional setbacks all the time as a writer. I still pitch articles to newspapers and magazines and I still get blanked. I still deal with rejection. I still have to push to get a response from people. And I know everybody's got email fatigue because it's COVID, but even when you've made a name for yourself, you still have to think about rejection all the time. As a freelance writer, you still have to fight to get your ideas heard. So I'm quite used to that, but it's still quite a depressing reality that, sometimes you could send the best idea ever to an editor and just hear nothing back. And then you could send a follow-up email and then still hear nothing back. So I think professional setbacks, rejection is definitely something that has characterized my career. And I think a lot of freelance writers can relate to that, but you just kind of have to accept it and you have to persevere and you have to keep going. Otherwise, you're never going to get anywhere. And you have to have a thick skin as well.
Got another question from Iram. How do you get your creativity going when reflecting writing?
How do I get my what, sorry?
How do you get your creativity going when you're reflecting on your writing or what to write about?
How do I get my creativity? I think music helps. Like if I'm reflecting on a part of my childhood, I could really play some like late 90s, noughties music and it would really take me back to that part of my childhood. If I'm writing about being in Nicaragua, I can try and find some bachata or whatever that I used to listen to, and that really puts me in the mood. Sometimes if I'm stuck, because my book is mainly memoir, but it's also got some research and some interviews. So luckily, they're two very different types of writing. Like writing about, yourself and your experiences is very emotive and it's very, I guess, creative, but writing about studies and academic stuff, I find that easier personally. So if I was stuck on one thing, I would move to another and I wouldn't feel bad about that. Like I'm not a linear writer. I just start where I feel inspired and I could leave it for a week and then go on to another chapter. And then if I'm in the mood to finish off that theme, I could come back to it. So I think don't beat yourself up if you've got writer's block. Like you can pause and, come back to it when you feel more inspired. Go and work on something else for a while. Go for a walk, listen to, a song that brings you back to a certain time. Don't feel like you're sitting at your desk and you have to move like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. You don't have to do that. Like even when I was at school and I did essays, my history essays, I would always start, like in the middle or write the conclusion first. I would never start at the beginning and my teacher used to tell me off, but that's just how I work. So if that's what works for you, I would say follow whatever suits you in whatever mood you're in. I hope that helps.
One suggested question that I'd love to hear. What was your favorite book when you were a teenager?
Ooh, favorite book when I was a teenager. I think Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman.
Love that one, yeah.
Which is, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a young adult book about a made-up world in which the noughts are the white people. It's sort of, racism, but in a different imagined sense. The noughts are the white people and the crosses are the black people, and the crosses have all the power, all the political power. And it's a love story between somebody called Seffi, who is a cross, and she's very wealthy, and Callum, who is a nought, and they kind of cross these racial political boundaries to be together. And I just remember being completely transfixed by this world that was about race, but as a kid I didn't really think about it too much. I just thought about the love story and the sort of forbidden love to it, but it's a really great book. And now, you know, it's been made into a BBC series recently. So yeah, that was something that I read, I think, again and again when I was a teenager. I loved it.
Do you have any advice for a young writer who's hoping to get published?
Yeah, I think when you're starting out, reading widely is really key. Everybody will say this to you, but it's really good advice. Like, you can't be a writer if you don't read widely and read often. Reading the kind of stuff that you're interested in, I think, will help you be a better writer in that field. If you like poetry, read a lot of poets. Like, go and find different types of poets from different eras and compare their styles. It's also good to read other stuff, even if you don't want to, you know, work in that area. I think reading widely and reading varied is great. And then, yeah, being brave about letting people view your work. You can't improve as a writer, unfortunately, unless you know, send your essay to a friend or have somebody look at your blog or, you know, put yourself out there. I think it's really easy these days to make noise online, and that is unfortunately how you stand out. Like, you need to have a blog, you need to be writing, and you need to be, I guess, showcasing your work, or at least thinking about doing that in the near future. Like, it's fine to sort of practice on your own, but at some stage you have to, like, you know, hand it over to someone else and let them give you some feedback. Otherwise you won't grow as a writer and you won't develop that thick skin I was talking about, which is really important in the world of freelancing and publishing. So yeah, being brave enough to let people read your work and creating a name for yourself however you can, whether that's like your school paper or, yeah, making a blog, whatever it is. You need to definitely, like, try and stand out and try and prove to people in the job world, I guess, when you start looking at jobs or college, that, you know, you've got passion for this and you already have started doing things and you've already started putting yourself out there. I think that's really key.
We have another question from the Q&A section. It's from Cynthia. How are you able to write about very important parts of your life that still evoke a lot of negative emotion without putting yourself in a distressing headspace?
Very good question. I found it hard. Like, I found it really hard. You know, writing about someone that's not around anymore, my dad, that was really difficult. And then having to do the audio version of the books, you know, reading my book out in an audio booth and literally reading the words about my father out again and again in the right tone. I had to have breaks. I had to take, you know, water in with me. I had to sit down because it's so emotionally draining going over stuff that has, you know, caused you trauma or caused you heartache. So I don't know if there's a magic answer to that. It does get easier as you keep doing it, but I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing because you kind of become desensitized to talking about really painful things. So yeah, it's still something that I'm figuring out. You know, the first interview I ever gave for this book was with a podcast, a big American podcast, and I ended up crying in the interview because it was so emotionally taxing. And then, you know, after that I became better at it and I realized how to tell my story and how to talk about my dad without sort of dredging up all these emotions. So yeah, practice makes perfect. It does get easier, but it's not something that I would necessarily recommend to people, you know, like writing about really traumatic parts of your past. Like, you have to really know that you want to tell that story because people are going to make you repeat it again and again and again. So definitely, you know, be prepared for that if that's the kind of writing that you do want to do. And I think being settled in myself really helped. You know, like I said, I got a lot of therapy, I did some traveling, and that really helped me sort of calm myself and know how I wanted to tell my story and help me feel in control of my story. So I would say if you do want to write about something that's painful or traumatic, know that it's always best to not be writing from a place of pure anger or pure rage or pure pain. Feeling settled in yourself, feeling calm, feeling in control of your emotions is key if you're going to start talking about them and putting it down on paper. So I think when I wrote the book, you know, it was a few years after everything had happened and I felt more fully in my power, shall we say, because I'd had that time to, you know, reassess the kind of person that I wanted to be and the kind of topics that I wanted to talk about. So there's definitely hard days, but not writing, you know, immediately in the midst of that pain, I think is really, really important. Give yourself time to breathe and then once you come back to it, I think the writing will be stronger.
I'm curious about, sorry, I'm just bouncing off of that, what you just said. Do you find it helpful to write when you are feeling those tough emotions as like a way to process, even if it's not like polished or perfect or something you like really want to work on? Or is that not your process?
Yeah, no, I think I have to be in a really good, like in a quite a good space to write. Like if I'm having an emotional day, a bad day, I don't tend to do my best work then. You know, I have to be sort of in a schedule, or, you know, knowing that I'm going to write that day, but not necessarily knowing what it is that I'm going to tackle. But once I get to it, maybe it will bring up emotions, maybe it will evoke things that, you know, I'd suppressed. But I don't find that being in a really emotional headspace is the best way for me to write about emotional things. I don't find it particularly cathartic. You know, if the emotions come up when I'm writing, fine, but it's not really like a way in which I've sort of felt catharsis. I've had therapy for that, I guess. So the actual writing was just on top of that.
Thank you.
Okay, well, our last question is coming from Jillian, and they ask, what do you wish you'd known that you didn't before you started writing your book?
Oh, so much stuff. So much stuff. I guess from a publishing perspective, I've learned a lot about the industry. The book is published in the UK and it's published in the US, and even just working with both those markets, you know, like the US wanted a different type of cover to the UK wanted a photo cover. So looking at how each market talks about race and how each market has pitched the book has been really interesting. I've also learned that, you know, the US market works a little bit faster. You know, they've got stuff planned further in advance. The UK was a bit slower. So I had sort of mini panic attacks when things didn't go my way or things were different in one country that they were in the other. And I've just learned a lot about how the publishing industry works in general, I think. I've also learned about agents and advances and, you know, how to sort of make a living as a writer, and all the stuff about promoting your work is really key. You think that once you've written a book or written something big, that's going to be it. The work's just going to speak for itself. No, you have to keep talking about it and keep promoting it and keep putting yourself out there, keep doing events, and not everybody likes that. And I'm quite extroverted as a person, but I've definitely found it taxing, like I was saying, talking about personal issues. I think maybe if it was a different type of book and we weren't in a pandemic and I was going out meeting people, it would probably be far more enjoyable. But at the minute, there's been times when, you know, looking at a screen after having a really heartfelt, emotional interview has been not as satisfying as perhaps I'd want it to be. So I've learned a lot about, me and how I work as a writer. And then, of course, you know, about family and writing about race. I'm used to doing that as a journalist, but I think with a book, I'm getting feedback that kind of trickles through a bit more slowly. When you write a piece online and it goes viral or it gets lots of hits, suddenly you're flavor of the week and you've got everyone talking about the piece for a week, and then it will go completely quiet and your dopamine hit is gone for like the next month until you write something else. But with a book, it's been a lot more of a slow process. It's been a lot more gradual. I get sort of feedback from people, but it's kind of trickled throughout, you know, throughout months. It's going to continue, I guess, for as long as people read the book, which will be for hopefully forever. So I've learned a lot about how I like to work, and I think I prefer the slow process of book writing to the kind of fast-paced, clickbaity online stuff that I've sort of built my career up to that point. So there's been lots. I could go on and on about what I've learned, but that's sort of in a nutshell, a lot about the industry and a lot about myself.
Thank you so much for that.